Hello, everyone. Bobby Jones here for this week's edition of Anchor Watch. Um, I know I typically have a rundown of what we're going to do and what we're going to talk about, but there are so many significant issues going on. I want most of this session to be more question answer, but I want to lay out what's happening. So, for those who have been living under a rock, a lot of things have kicked off here on the international and domestic um, sphere dealing with the United States. And no matter what we're going to talk about today, it has one person in common, and that is Donald John Trump. And the reason I'm going to hammer on this is, you know, from the time I was 18 and going through my plebe summer at the Naval Academy, I was taught leadership matters. Now we are seeing it real time. Okay, real time. So let me just give y'all a brief overview. Let's talk about what you saw domestically this weekend. You saw the Army's 250th anniversary. You saw the parade that was attached to it, and you saw the results of it. The parade was lackluster. You could easily tell that the soldiers who were there did not want to be there, period. There's no one that's going to be able to tell me different. I know what it looks like when you're marching and you give a damn. And I also know what it looks like when you don't want to be there. That was the latter. Okay. And contrast that to the millions, literally millions of people in over 2,000 different sites protesting the president of the United States. And we're not just talking domestically, we're talking worldwide. Okay. Worldwide. Significant messaging happened this past weekend. Why am I starting with this? I'm not one of these talking heads of like, oh, this means this, blah, 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 blah. No, it affected the psyche of the president of the United States. We know that he is definitely more sensitive than anybody we've seen in modern times in the White House. Okay. If you don't think the failure of his parade and the success of the protest does not factor into his mindset currently right now, you're wrong. So he skirts off to the G7 summit, proceeds to have press conferences that keeps the other leaders awkward. And then next thing we know, he's taken off like a bat out of hell in the middle of the night to go back to DC. Now, I think this is twofold. I think this is a twofold reason. One, I believe the people around him, who I'm now referring to as his handlers, are way more likely to pull him from the public stage because they're worried about what he will say, how it will come off, the rambling, the conversations that just go off into nowhere. That cannot happen, especially during times of international crisis. So they're pulling him from the G7 summit, where he is now no longer able to make statements that could literally change the course of the world. And then number two, I honestly believe they have no idea about what they want to do. I think Trump wants to reclaim some type of strength visibly to both the United States and the rest of the world. Now, I want us to bring up something. Sam, if you can bring up the picture here. For those who don't know, the United States of America, since Ronald Reagan, has put out what was called a national security strategy. This document comes out every 4 years, 4 to 5 years, and during an administration change, typically. The last one, as you can see there, was October of 2022, Biden-Harris administration. The president of the United States has not released one of these. Why is this important? It lays out in very plain terms, not just for the American people, not just for allies, but for adversaries, on what the United States believe are their security concerns. It's a guiding light at an unclassified level for expected actions and what we are willing to do. President Trump has not released one of these. I don't think he will. Instead, he's come and ruled by executive order, an inordinate amount of them, because he's unpredictable. And it seems like the last person that talks to him is the one that sways his decision. So he flies back to DC. The National Security Council was told to be ready to meet. Why is this an issue? I'll explain why this is an issue. This is the same National Security Council that they fired of the staff for within the last month. It shrunk from 300 to 150. We don't know the distribution of what areas of the world were removed and what were not. But here's the thing, your subject matter expertise has been greatly reduced. Now, add that, add that to the fact that your national security advisor is also your secretary of state, who also has the additional job of being the national archivist and also the head of USAID, the United States' biggest soft power arm, all in one person, Marco Rubio. According to reports, various reports, there may be a last ditch effort for some type of peaceful resolution, although Trump himself said here in the last 24 hours that he does not really care for a peaceful solution anymore. He's basically said, we warned Iran. The rumor is that Steve Wynkoff, his Middle East envoy, and J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, will be headed to the Middle East. Let me be very clear. That is the Secretary of State's job. That's the Secretary of State's job historically. Okay. Number two, there's another piece of this. They want to show that the person they're sending, Wyckoff, has gravity, so they're going to tag the vice president with him. Vice president really doesn't have any policy holding capability in any administration for the most part, especially foreign. But here we are. We need to make the show that this matters. At the same time, Trump has told the world that he does not care what Tulsi Gabbard, his handpicked selection for director of intelligence, director of national intelligence, has said about Iran and their nuclear capability, which less than 3 months ago, she said, they're probably 3 years or more away. He said, I don't care. I'm trusting what Israel is telling me. And they're saying everything is imminent. Puppy George won. Rubio's not up to the job. I agree. None of these people are, because the qualifications to get the job is loyalty, not expertise. This is what happens when you don't have adults in the room, ladies and gentlemen. You have no national security strategy. You have no one that you can send abroad that commands the respect that needs to be had in this situation. And then most importantly, you have moved military assets into position. As someone who has been on ships that have responded to an order to move because of a crisis to include the Middle East, this is what people should be paying attention to. The USS Nimitz Strike Group has left the South China Sea area of operations and is booking it right now back to the Middle East, back to the Gulf, okay, the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, depending on what you want to call it. You have multiple United States Air Force area refueling tankers en route to Europe to be prepositioned if need be. Why? Because these aircraft are needed to basically refuel the bombers that can drop certain ordnance that can penetrate bunkers and get to where many believe the nuclear capabilities have resided for Iran. Israel does not have that capability. They need the United States to do it for them. So here we go. We're now about to directly involve United States assets, United States sailors, airmen, Marines, possibly soldiers into this conflict. If I remember correctly, because I'm old enough to remember in 2024, this man, Donald Trump said that, hey, everybody, we're not going to do these wars in the Middle East. We're not going to do these wars everywhere. They're useless. They're pointless. Then why the heck do we have 6,000 sailors streaming up to the damn Gulf now? Why do we have multiple aircraft moving into Europe, into NATO places that are not originally supposed to be there? Why is that? Why? And here's the question. Anytime you move military forces, anytime the possibility of military engagement is there, you better have a desired end state. The United States figured that out the hard way in Afghanistan and Iraq. We did not state it. Okay. So now we're ignoring our own intelligence. We don't have a defined goal of what military action looks like, and we have no overarching national security strategy. Can someone please explain to me what victory looks like in this situation, and how does the United States, its service members, and its citizens abroad do not become targets by a country who is the largest single-handed state sponsor of terrorist activities around the world? Actions have consequences. No adults in the room making decisions that think beyond just the initial reaction have consequences. Marco Rubio is not being sent abroad because, to be honest with you, who's going to listen to him? Pete Hegseth is not being abroad because, to be honest with you, last time he went abroad, he pissed off countries in the South China Sea. I mean, this is what happens where leadership fails. Where leadership fails. The next 48 hours are extremely important because that's going to tell us what actions, if any, the United States will take. Senator Bernie Sanders, he's brought to the Senate floor a resolution or a law basically saying that President Trump will not be able to enact actions against Iran unless explicitly, basically approved by Congress. He's doing it because Congress controls the purse, and the funds that will be necessary for that to happen could be controlled by Congress. And he's trying to get this to the floor for a vote. I don't know if that's going to be successful. This is what happened when America went into Iraq and they gave President George W. Bush basically a blank check to do whatever he wanted to do. These are the things that should worry people. That should really worry people, because if Congress feels like they need to act, then they have been given briefs and intelligence reports that you and I do not see. Everything that I'm seeing is open source intelligence, but make no mistake, we've told people in Tehran that are not just American citizens, we told just people in Tehran, you need to vacate the premises and you need to leave. And if you look on any news report here in the last hour, you see a steady stream of people trying to leave the city. The state TV studio in Tehran was bombed live on air yesterday. Okay. All of these things are happening to the point where if anybody is reading tea leaves, you don't move forces. You don't have these things happen unless you plan to do something with it. Rhetoric is one thing, movement of people, assets, and weapons are another. And we're seeing the last three right now. Now, I'm going to pause there to see if anybody has any questions on what we've talked about so far, because this is a lot. Let's see. What's the worst case, best case scenario for Iran and Israel? Are we going to get pulled in? So that's a very good question. Let's start with best case. Let's start with best case. That somehow, some way, an immediate ceasefire is negotiated, which would be huge. Because right now, I don't think in particular Israel wants the ceasefire. I think Israel's strategic goal is not just the denuclearification of Iran, but also a regime change. Now, let me break down why I say that. The Iranian military is broken into two factions. You have the conventional Iranian military that, people would equate to the United States or France or wherever. And then you have this other sect, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And they basically mirror each other. The difference is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is considered more radical because they answer to the Ayatollah, not to the prime minister, not to the president, not to the government. Okay. What Israel has done specifically in their attacks, they have decapitated the IRG. Okay. They have gone after the Revolutionary Guard. They have killed many of their leaders in many spheres, okay, that control different aspects of it. That is speaking to trying to weaken the regime, not the governing arm, not the people that do the day-to-day operations. So I don't know if that's possible. That would be best case, where we get a ceasefire and we hope people stop for a second, pause, and take a look at this. Now, the problem with that is, even if you get the ceasefire, right now it looks like from Iran's standpoint that they were bullied into it. They are weak. They have not had any type of retaliation to the level of what's happened to them. So I think that's a non-starter. Worst case scenario is this. Worst case scenario is the decision is made. They want the regime change. They request the United States help. We help them. And we basically let them use our weaponry, our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines. They use the bunker buster weapons to get after these things. And now regime on the Iranian side has no exit ramp. Sun Tzu said it best. You got to leave your enemy a way out if you want the war to stop. There won't be at that point because the regime will be fighting for its survival, its actual survival, which means they may be willing to sacrifice everybody if they know they're going out anyway. So you're talking about larger casualties, mass casualties, a prolonged conflict because there is no exit ramp provided by either Israel, the United States, or anybody in the region. And then when that starts to fall apart, right? My great concern then becomes: does this go and devolve from political into religious aspects of warfare? Which at least those are the type of things in the room that people should be talking about in the PIOC, as we're sitting there and we're speaking, right? I don't know who's doing that, if I'm being honest. And that should scare people. That should really scare people. The other piece of this too is, let's hold on. Question: is this a that? So Jonathan Campbell, that is a very good question. I don't think this Congress would give Trump emergency powers. When you say war powers and emergency powers, you know, there are ways that you can separate. Hey, you're given these authorities to do this particular task. That's what happened in Vietnam. That's what happened in the Gulf War. That's the type of thing where you can separate it. I don't think Congress will allow themselves to give President Trump just emergency powers, broad base, and be like, do whatever you feel is necessary, because it's pretty obvious that he will then go into, domestic issues and use those powers to justify that. But that's a good question. I will say this: it has been shown that the Trump administration will generate emergency situations or over embellished situations in an attempt to exercise authority that they probably should not have. And that's not me saying that. The courts have said that, both with the domestic stuff that we've seen, and Congress is now thinking about that for the international stuff that we've seen. People need to understand, if the United States signs a treaty, for example, Congress has to ratify the treaty. It's not just the president negotiating it by himself, right? So I think there are some checks and balances there. I think more of this is something that Trump sees to regain a strong man footing on the international stage. Now, the question is, did Netanyahu and the Israeli government kind of bully him into that? Possibly. But he feels very vulnerable right now based on what's happened the last week domestically in the United States. So you've got to balance those kind of things when you're looking at the psyche of a man that is not typical of what we've seen in the White House before, and these extraordinary circumstances that are happening right now. Let's see, what else do we have? Let's see any other. Wall Street Journal is reporting that Iran wants to de-escalate and negotiate, apparently because they're getting beat badly. Is this your understanding? Um, yes, I think that's somewhat accurate. I think the part that they're not talking about, though, is Israel is getting hit now as we move into this latter stage of missile bombardment. Iran has a high inventory of very cheap, not necessarily the most reliable, ballistic missiles, right? Short range ballistic missiles, and I know this because I worked at Missile Defense Agency while I was still in uniform, so I have a very good idea of what their capabilities are, and they're starting to hit targets. If you did not see this weekend, the U.S. Embassy branch in Tel Aviv was slightly damaged by one of those type of missiles. So make no mistake, Israel's taking hits too. Now, what I find interesting is, depending on where you get your reporting, like the Wall Street Journal, they'll focus more on Iran and not Israel. As you look at somewhere like, we're missing out on some things here. I think both sides could benefit from a de-escalation, but I think Israel's strategic objective of eventual regime change, and they asked Netanyahu this question directly, he did not answer it, he dodged it. I think They believe it's worth everything because Iran right now is very vulnerable. However, the problem with the wounded animal is that's when they fight the hardest. So if there is no de-escalation, Iran just may say to hell with it and just do it and shoot everything they got left. And I mean everything they have left. You froze on screen when you're talking about religious aspects. Can you explain that again? Yeah, sorry about that. So what I mean, my concern is right now, I still see this as a political fight, right? Nation state versus nation state. But you always have to be careful because of the religious backgrounds of Israel and Iran that this does not spill into um, a religious war, which is how Iran, the Ayatollah, will basically frame this, right? If that happens, the support of the other nations in the region that are more Muslim than they are Jewish, et cetera, could factor in. I mean, think about it like this: these missiles that are flying are crossing over the airspace of various countries, depending on the route they take, right? Who's to say they're like, well, we're not going to allow that? Now, if I'm Israel, I'm looking at the situation like it doesn't matter. We're trying to fight for survival, et cetera, et cetera. And you hope that the ties that you have developed with these other countries in the region, especially in the economic space in the last 10 years, will allow you to continue to prosecute the war that you believe is about self-survival. Okay. But when you start branching from politics and the governments, the Netanyahu government, the Iranian government, and then you devolve into religious aspects, that's the wild card because you can never really predict how people are going to understand and respect that, especially in that region. That was a very good question. Sorry about that on the freezing. What else do we have? Let's see, and a ground war in Iran is economic suicide with our current finances. I would agree. I think a ground war anywhere. I think a war anywhere, a sustained combat operation could be economic suicide. That includes using, say, naval power to, fly strike missions, whether it's Tomahawk base, F-18 base, whatever. Whenever you commit forces in an uncertain situation, there's a ripple effect economically around the world. We have already dealt with economic uncertainty just based on the tariff war that President Trump has started, period. Now we're talking about kinetic warfare. Everything changes, and you're doing it in the region of the world that supplies most of the oil and energy rich resources to the rest of the world, right? It's a bad combination. I have not heard anybody talk about the economic impact of a prolonged conflict in the Persian Gulf region in the United States Central Command region. But rest assured, it would be significant. The other piece of this too is how do you walk back from it? What does the return to normal look like? Okay, what happens? Let's say Israel is successful in forcing the regime change. Who's next? Now you're dealing with the devil you don't know, and you're also dealing with diplomatic and economic situations that you're not prepared to deal with. And I say we're not prepared to deal with it because we have not publicly said what we want in the United States or what we hope to happen in the United States. Europe has not done it. No one has done it. And so when you unilaterally act like Israel has basically done, the rest of the world now has to be on guard for the results. The difference now is if the United States gets dragged into it as well, everything is amplified. Everything is amplified. What else do we have? U.S. is full of Yesmen now. We're sitting ducks. Well, the administration, yes. Congress and the courts, no. However, the majority is held by the president's party. But what has made me kind of have some hope on this, you have GOP members who are questioning what the hell is going on. I mean, Rand Paul said it here recently. Now, Lindsey Graham is went the opposite, but you've had people step up. Steve Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, people who I never thought would be as blunt and direct to counter what Trump is doing, have done this in the last 24 hours. They're like, this is insane. This is not what we voted for. You said we keep you out of wars. And at this point, I know people hate their guts on the left and this, that, and the other, but at this point, you need anybody that can help stop and derail the train, in my opinion, right? Does Congress have power anymore, Stu? Yes, they do. They choose not to use it. They choose not to use it because in their political calculations, it is better to still either support Trump or to remain silent than to go against them and possibly lose their cushy jobs. They're cushy. Let's see. They're questioning it, but they will speak. Will they speak up or do anything about it? I don't know if Congress here is going to speak up anytime soon. I'll tell you when they'll start speaking up. If this type of stuff continues, then they'll try to separate themselves for the midterms. Congress is not stupid. They saw the No Kings rally. They saw these things happen in areas that have traditionally been dominant red. They're not dumb. It's the political calculation of the American people putting enough pressure on them for them to say, it makes more sense for me to walk away from Trump and rejoin, in my mind, rational thought. Because if you look at this internationally, we're streaming very fast to another Middle East war. Okay, domestically, we have the basic rights of habeas corpus questioned every day. Every day, we're looking at government programs that taxpayers have paid into being stripped away. The Senate has basically unveiled their version of a bill. And yes, guess what? They went after Medicaid, even though they said they wouldn't. How many senior citizens, how many Americans have paid into that now all of a sudden will not be able to use it? These are the type of things that happen when you have amateurs who are in the White House and they're not subject matter experts. There is not one person, and I mean not one person in that cabinet right now that I personally look at and be like, tell that person to go do something about it because they are competent. Let's see. It's impossible to put that genie back in the bottle. So that's a very good question. He can't put it back in the bottle, which is why they are calling the emergency meeting that they have called. I think it. I think. Then this is not hyperbole. This is me, and this is the most. This is the most dangerous we've been to starting another war in the last 25 years since 9/11. And that's not me just being over the top. That is me being very serious in what I'm saying. We have uncertainty abroad. We have uncertainty at home. We have two very powerful regional actors acting, and the world is typically used to looking at the United States for guidance and strategy, and they don't see it. They don't see it. Because here's a question I would ask all of you in the chat. What does the end game look like here? What does the end game look like? And does the end game allow for a loss of life, American losses of life? I mean, is that acceptable to the average American? Because right now we are positioning ourselves where we may not have a choice. We may not have a choice. It's tragic in a lot of respects because a lot of this, in my humble opinion, is avoidable. Again, if we had diplomats, if we didn't cut the State Department, if we did not cut the National Security Council, if we had people who were in office that were actual subject matter experts, and heck, even then, if we had a president that would listen to him, he's not listening to Tulsi Gabbard. They completely ignored it. We have someone whose ego is hurt, and it's about to cost us lives. Do you believe that if absolutely necessary, that Vance could step up for the betterment of the country? No. It's very simple. We've seen him become a chameleon politically and do what he thinks. It's almost like he has the same complex the president does. He tries to act like he's tough, big, and bad. He does a little subtle stuff that makes you question what's going on with him. Like for those who are not in the military, he went down to Quantico, Virginia, where there's a big Marine Corps base, and he walked into the mess hall with the hat saying, "Once a Marine, always a Marine." First of all, every Marine knows you don't wear your hat in the mess hall. And number two, you wear the hat to remind people, hey, I was one of you. If you were confident in your own abilities, you wouldn't have to do something like that. So here's my question for him. What would he even stand for? Or is he just going to be told what to do? There's something about him that I just do not trust, right? As a matter of fact, I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think of the cabinet. And like I said earlier, I got nothing. I got nothing as far as someone who can take a stand and be able to say, this is what needs to be done on the behalf of the United States, our allies, and the international sphere. I just don't see it. Let's take one last one. Let's see. We all need to hear. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I just paid attention through various experiences. The one thing I will say about the Navy, if you serve 20 something years, you're going to see the world. And it just so happened that the time period that I served, 2001 to 2023, I got to see a lot. And you run into people who are subject matter experts, and you start to realize that critical thinking is the most important asset that you have in the international space. It's the most important asset. And right now, we are devoid of critical thinking. That's all I have this week. Go ahead and follow me on Substack. If you become a paid subscriber for like $8, you'll get a daily morning briefing to start off your day by 7 a.m. every morning, Monday through Friday, where I break down things as they happen more real time. But until then, I definitely will see you guys next week. And please go to Veterans for Responsible Leadership website there to get involved with our organization that I'm president of. And hey, keep your head on a swivel and stay sharp, America.